Tell us a little bit about this documentary series called UNHEARD and how you became involved with it.
Well, UNHEARD is a 6-part documentary series. It's an investigative look at racial issues in Australia. And so where this began was I was working with Lad Bible on a campaign called UNHEARD, which launched in February of 2021. And essentially what we were doing is looking at how we can use the audience, which is over 500 million people worldwide, how we use that Lad Bible audience to support issues here in Australia, particularly around racial injustice. So I think we saw in 2020, there were thousands and thousands of Australians taking to the streets, asking for more coverage on issues of racial injustice here in Oz. And it kind of raised a good question. It's why was it that, and why is it that most of Australia know who George Floyd is, but not many know the names David Dungay Jr. or TJ Hickey? And so we looked to address that, and then how I started out was reaching out to the National Justice Project and National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, Asian Australian Alliance, Islamophobia Register, Refugee Council of Australia, and a number of other partners, including Human Rights Commission, and spoke with them about how could we most effectively use this large reach that we have, large audience and community that we have, to really help bolster the support around these organisations, the work that they do, and put focus on the people that they represent. And so throughout that campaign, we managed to funnel a large, we've reached 100 million people on that campaign so far, and funneled those people into the relative petitions, volunteer programs, donation facilities for each of our partners. But we wanted to take it one step further, and what we did was begin to develop a documentary series that addressed some of these issues, and those key issues that we were looking at and working with our partners to identify were Indigenous deaths in custody, the targeting of Indigenous youth, attacks towards Asians during the COVID pandemic, attacks towards Muslim women in Australia, the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees, and the vilification of the African community. And as we worked with them throughout 2021, what we did was identify those key cases that are really kind of emblematic of the issues that we face here in Oz. And then from there, what we did was work with Amazon Prime Video to start developing a 6 times half-hour documentary series to really look at those first-hand accounts, but then also dig into the stats that are behind the broader issues.
Were those organisations that you approached, were they quite helpful when you spoke to them? Was there any hesitation from them at all about the series?
No, not at all. I mean, what we made sure to do at every point of the process was to work with those partners and work with the participants to make sure it was their voices being heard. So they were part of building that narrative. They were part of making sure they had approvals on the episodes. And I think, that first period where we worked together with them on the campaign, it was really building that trust, building that relationship to make sure that they knew that our intentions were in the right place, and we could really help facilitate the best possible outcome for each other. Lad Bible, we have a bit of a history in this space, and so we've worked not just in racial injustice, but also around conservation groups. One particular example is how we worked with the LGBTQIA community in the UK with a campaign called Illegal Blood Bank, which was stopping homosexual men from donating blood at the time. And through that campaign, we actually helped to change the country's laws. And now it is illegal for men of the LGBTQI community to give blood there. And what we're hoping to do is see the same here, is that the more attention and the more global focus we can put on the issues here in Australia, the more likely it is that the decision makers feel that pressure to be able to make positive change.
You would have heard some horrific personal stories. How did it affect you personally working on this series?
Working with the families and communities and the individuals involved, as well as the organisations that support them, they're fighting this stuff every day, day in and day out. And so what we really, what was key about this was lending our platform to amplify their voices. And look, to be perfectly honest, yes, working and hearing these cases day in and day out, it does absolutely take its toll, but it's nothing in comparison to what the individuals who have experienced this firsthand, who have lost family members, who have lost friends, who are personally, subject to a lot of these sometimes violent incidents. We really kind of have to take a backseat to them and let them try this. And so, yes, yeah, absolutely. The empathy and sympathy is there for the family and participants, and you do feel that, but it pales in comparison to those who are actually, experiencing this day in and day out and having that fight.
Yeah, this documentary series is a real eye-opener. I know for myself, I grew up in a very multicultural part of Melbourne. In fact, the primary school that I went to, in my class, there were 2 Australians, and I think the rest of the class was made up from about 16 different nationalities. So to me, I was never experienced any of the racism or anything that I've since learnt happens in other parts of Australia. How important was that for you with this series to kind of open up Australians' eyes to what exactly is going on, especially for those of us that grew up in multicultural areas that did have a great relationship with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see this, and I think what is so great about this series and the campaign is kind of shining a light on incidents that sometimes might get 30 seconds worth of coverage on the news. I think we're spending an extended time to learn about these stories and hear these stories and hear what goes on behind them. I can totally relate with your experience living in a multicultural area, but even in these areas. So, one example is an incident that we explore in one of the episodes around an attack towards 2 Asian Australian girls in Marrickville. And as you know, Marrickville would be, one of the most, if not the most multicultural, one of the most multicultural areas in Australia.
Yeah.
And so to see these racist attacks happen even in those areas, you realise, this is somewhere where good relationships between communities is established. And so if it's happening there, you can imagine where it's happening over the country and how that's being reported on. And that's kind of one of the big issues you'll see that's threaded between the episodes, is that these incidents continue to happen. And it's the way that they're being reported and recorded that isn't allowing us to really change the laws, because we're not properly monitoring it. And you have organisations like National Justice Project, like the Asian Australian Alliance, Islamophobia Register, who are trying to mitigate that almost and help to create records and really say, look, we have a body of evidence to say this is, systemic behaviour that's occurring again and again, and we need to really address it in a way that's thorough and effective.
Also, this series, I know a lot of people are going to watch this series and then are going to want to get involved with the UNHEARD campaign. Can you tell us a little bit more about the UNHEARD campaign and how people can become involved with it after they've watched the series as well?
Yeah, yep. So what we did is, and what was so great about the campaign and the series is that all the partners involved, all the participants and organisations, we're all on the same page. And spreading awareness around these issues is great, but we also want to see action behind it too. And so, people can go to and visit the campaign and support the campaign now at ladbible.com/unheard, and that directs our audience of over 500 million worldwide into our various partners. But also at the end of each episode, what we do is drive people towards those organisations, individuals who are involved when we address each of those issues. So when we're looking at refugees and asylum seekers, we're driving people to Refugee Council of Australia. When we're looking at issues around Indigenous deaths in custody, we're driving people towards NATSLs and National Justice Project. And so, we do want to spread awareness and make sure people know what's happening here in Australia, but we also want to help garner that support from people that we're making aware. And so, with our combined audience that we have at Lad Bible, and we're combining that with Amazon Prime Video's global audience of over 175 million, we're really hoping that reaching those numbers, putting a global focus on these issues, is going to result in a greater support for the partners and participants we're working with.
Definitely. And to finish up, what would you like to say to our listeners out there before they sit down and watch the documentary, and what would you like them to take away from this series as well?
I think, what we see, and some of these cases, people may have, seen David Dungai Jr. on the news or heard the stories about Rosie and Sophia Dover. And I think what's important is, and I think Jenny Leong, who makes an appearance in one of the episodes, she talks about this, and she says what we need to do is actually just listen to the stories and sit uncomfortably with them for a while and really recognize that this is an issue. And I think that's probably, working with the organizations that we do, that's probably the most common kind of obstacle that we're coming across, is that people don't want to acknowledge this as an issue. And I think, once people watch this documentary series and see the personal impacts, the family impacts, the community impacts, the mental impacts that it has, they'll start to realize that, okay, this is something we need to address. So that's what I really hope that we can get out of this, is that people can be aware of these stories and start to make steps towards healing.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today. And again, congratulations and thank you for making such an important documentary series as well.
Thank you.